Do you ever have a great pairing like jasmine tea and almond sponge cake?
Or lemonade and cherries?
And it just makes each part taste different, maybe even better than they would on their own? This is Juxtapose, the podcast where we bring you two tasty pieces of art to see what they're like together.
I'm your host, Bea Forkin.
And I'm Sarah Peacher. Let's dig in. Today, I'm bringing to the table Prada's Spring-Summer 2024 ready-to-wear collection shown at Milan Fashion Week. And I'm also bringing a side today. This is a new thing of Hunter Schafer's look at the Golden Globes earlier this spring award season. So to quote Prada's website here, the Prada Spring-Summer 2024 collection proposes an absolute freedom of the body expressed in lightweight dresses in floaty fabrics that challenge the language of classic tailoring. Formal silhouettes borrowed from menswear are reimagined in architectural forms that reconsider the archetypal contours of formal rigor. That's the end of that quote, which I think is a very maybe pretentious way to say that a lot of the focus in this collection that Prada created was balancing between more femme and dressy things and more formal menswear things. There's a lot of, juxtaposition, to use a good word here, between the types of clothing that are brought to the table in Prada's Spring-Summer 2024 collection. So first thing I want to highlight is what the internet was calling the jellyfish dresses. And what I'm going to do here is try to describe to you. You can go look at them at some point, but I will describe to you what they look like for those of you who are listening. For those of you who watch, maybe I'll try to put it on the screen. So these jellyfish dresses, they are about knee length on these models, which models are typically very tall, so they'd probably be even longer on me and Bea here. But on the models, they're knee length. They're very much a shift dress, just like straight down from the shoulders to the knee. Classic crew neckline and no sleeves on these dresses. They're sleeveless. And the fabrics are across the board there's several of these dresses. They're sort of pastel. The one that I'm looking at right now is this pastel pink, very light pink, maybe a little more on the cool side if I were to say. And it's covered in this organza that has this really cool sheen to it. Almost looks kind of like when you look at a pool and there's like the water in the way the light reflects in the water. It kind of gives me that a little bit. I feel like that's what organza tends to look like to me. But it's pink organza as well on top of the layer of the pink dress underneath. And the organza, what's really cool about it is that as the model is walking down the runway, the organza starts to like float and create these jellyfish-like movements through the air. And that's one of my favorite parts about this dress, which we'll get into when I talk about Hunter Schafer as well. So along with these jellyfish dresses walking down the runway, there are some other looks that we'll talk about too. But to take you sort of to the video that I was looking at, I'll describe that as these models were walking down the runway, there's slime dripping from the ceiling for this show, which they also had for their menswear show. But interesting too that it was present both for the menswear show and for this one to kind of like tie those two shows together. But I thought that it was interesting considering like the texture and feeling of the organza on the jellyfish dresses, and to have this like slime dripping from the ceiling was an interesting vibe. Overall, the silhouettes across the board feel quite like 20s, like 1920s. Which is interesting considering we're literally a century away from that. But I also recognize the similarity with the shift dresses and shapes for clothing that reemerged around the 60s too. And then there's these this was paired with the dress that I was just talking about, but there's these swim cap-like headbands. And that definitely makes me think of like the 20s and like groups of girlies, you know, jumping into the pool together to do their like routine or whatever. So, and I keep seeing that kind of hat around too on the runways this past season. These like swim cappy headband type things, and I'm not sure how to feel about them. I don't find them very appealing as like headwear, but that's where I'll end my little opinion piece on that. So one thing that they did here, they were definitely calling back a lot to like the history of Prada with this collection. But one thing in particular that they did, according to Harper's Bazaar, was that they revived one of Mario Prada's original designs from 1913, introducing a new evening bag featuring a clasp sculpted in the shape of a mythological figure. Instead of its original silk fabrication, it was made with re-nylon and nappa leather. So it kind of brought in the more modern materials to recreate this bag that is part of the history of Prada. There's a lot of subtlety and focus on the details for these very wearable looks to make them also like high fashion. The first look in the collection features what the collection notes named a fragment of a dress, which is like worn around the neck with this short suit. One of these elements of collaging different types of dresses with different purposes was really happening. There's utilitarian touches too, like a work jacket worn with a tassel-y skirt. Typically masculine and feminine pieces were paired together to create more androgynous looks, which I really loved. There was also this general move, and this happens a lot with like ready-to-wear collections, but there's still the Prada label present on a lot of things, but it's buried a bit more. And that just made me think about how there's been an ongoing trend of quiet luxury, of people wanting to buy luxury goods, but to not be obvious that they're wearing them. And this collection definitely reflects that in the ways that the labels are added. To give us a little bit more background about the designer too, so that we can have context, Raf Simons was the designer for this one. He's a designer from Belgium. He actually started as a furniture designer and then became a self-taught fashion designer, which I did not know before doing research for this episode. Very cool. And he had this whole piece on his website about like who Raf Simons is, which I will read out now. Quote, "The most important message Raf Simons wants to communicate is pride in individuality. Fueled by his love for both rebellious youth cultures and traditional menswear, he emerges in fashion halfway through the 90s, presenting a radically different image of masculinity. Fusing the energy and singularity of teenage subcultures with the sharpness and precision of classical sartorial craft, the look presented by Raf Simons is both inspired by and designed for confident outsiders. Always at the core of his universe, and as essential as the clothes themselves, are attitudes, moods, and statements about individuality and independence. Equally important in Raf Simons' approach is the constant quest for innovation. The designs are always looking for the now and tomorrow, even if they are inspired by historical or classical references." So I definitely see this translating to this collection of really connecting in the menswear. Raf Simons, known for menswear, he's looking at the traditional menswear, but he's bringing it to what is considered a women's wear collection and bringing in his vision for what women's wear could look like, connecting menswear with more of these floaty, very handcrafted looking, like the tassel skirts and some of the menswear pieces that are like a utilitarian jacket is like, this girl just took this jacket from her dad's closet kind of thing, which is very much like a thing that I envisioned from the 90s as well, which is where Raf Simons got his start. Was like, he was probably seeing women do that in the 90s of like taking old flannels and like utilitarian jackets from their dad's closet and pairing it with their favorite sundress kind of thing. And he's bringing that here, but making it a whole new thing as well. And now for the side of Hunter Schafer. So she is amazing. I love her. I discovered her on Euphoria, like a lot of people did. But I think some of her work outside of that has been even more interesting, better. Honestly, Euphoria's not the best show, but I did watch a lot of it. So it got my attention at least. But she was just in the Hunger Games movie, which is, we're coming full circle right back to last episode here. But she really brought the looks for the tour for the Hunger Games. And one of them, when she went to the Golden Globes, is when we saw this Prada moment come forward. So she wore one of the jellyfish dresses, but it was a custom version of it where it was floor length, and it was this really light pink color as well, similar to the one that I described before, but it was like very ethereal, subtle, but something about that fabric, the organza, especially as it was floating in the wind. Shout out to the breeze that was blowing in Hollywood that day because it made such a magical moment happen. It really brought this dress to life in a new way. And I think that's maybe something that I was vibing with in general when it came to this Prada collection, is that it is very like straightforward, feels wearable, but they're using fabrics in ways that make me think about them a little bit more, or like actually brings more movement to the fabric and creates a kind of silhouette to a piece of clothing that wouldn't be there without that particular fabric.
Okay, so today I am bringing to the table Danielle Orchard, a little bit of information about her. She's a contemporary painter. She was born in Michigan, 1985, received her MFA from Hunter College in New York. I learned about her work actually while reading an art magazine. The magazine is called Juxtapose, actually. Sometime during the pandemic, the magazine featured her work at the time, which was a series of Cubist-style paintings of women, many of them tennis players, smoking cigarettes, drinking, lounging on the tennis courts. I loved reading about the inspiration behind the paintings, which was a response to, at the time, I guess, or sometime in that era, Williams, very famous tennis player, was getting slack for not wearing appropriate tennis uniform while playing. So Danielle Orchard was reacting to the patriarchy regularly policing women's bodies and policing female athleticism. Personally, I'm really drawn to work that pushes against the patriarchy, and was immediately hooked when I learned that that was like an inspiration behind the work. I almost didn't even need to see any of the paintings to like basically be a fan. Though the images are as striking as the inspiration behind them. The paintings do not depict the women engaged in the immediate act of sport, but I would assume to be sometime after the main event. I love the scenes that she created with these series of tennis players because it just like screams rebellion. When I think about sports, or specifically tennis, it's such a sport of precision and discipline, perfection. For me, tennis reminds me a little bit of ballet in that way. And it's also more of a solo sport than a team one. So I appreciated that. In one of the paintings, the women were like on the same side of the net, sitting together. Another aspect of her work that I admire is the sensuality of the subjects. The female figure's sensuality is never hidden, and it is the main focus for many of the images. It reminds me a bit of Self's work from last season, where a lot of the sensuality was present and central in her work as well. But it seems to be functioning differently in Orchard's work. Self's work was like very celebratory, colorful, empowered, whereas the images in Orchard's work, I don't know, it seems like a little bit more subdued or sardonic. The color schemes are earthy, they're a bit muted, and the subjects, all of their facial expressions tend to be neutral. They're still. Though the characters are given full dimension, In this case, they're these female tennis players. They've just finished playing. They're indulging in their pleasure, smoking, drinking. They're hanging out on this court. They don't seem to be entirely happy. Like they're not laughing or smiling. And actually, their faces kind of gear a little bit towards sadness. And then I was wondering if that was like commentary on being trapped within like a patriarchal structure, or if it was demonstrating that women's bodies are constantly being consumed through this male lens and they're always being policed. And so that's like kind of a draining position to occupy. That was like a question that I had. I'm actually going to read a quote. I took this from the article Juxtapose. There was an interview that they did with Danielle Orchards. And so this is what she says. What's with tennis? That's a good question. These images entered my work around the same time Serena Williams was in the news for refusing to wear an appropriate outfit during a tournament. She was rebelling against male policing of the female body, and it was really beautiful to watch. I became interested after that in the history of women's tennis uniforms. They have always been contingent on the broader public's relationship to female sexuality. It has little to do with the female body in motion, but 100% about censorship and what men deem acceptable. At one point, uniforms were ankle length. I can't imagine trying to play a sport like that. Then in the 1970s, they got really short. So it's kind of all over the place. I was more interested in women's uniforms and the aesthetic surrounding tennis than in the activity itself. My relationship to the sport is speculative and relates to desire and projection. Desire and coveting are present in all of my paintings. I depict things I imagine myself doing, environments I fantasize about inhabiting, but instead I'm just painting them. So that's kind of like all I have for my like introduction about her. Should we shift into questions? Like, there's your cat.
Sure. She's being so cute.
Oh my, hi
Oh my
kitty.
goodness. Our third
Yes.
host has arrived. Okay. I really found that quote really interesting, especially thinking about women's uniforms and aesthetics overall, rebelling against male policing of the female body. Really interesting to juxtapose with having a male designer creating clothes for women. A vast majority of designers are
Right.
men. So I think that it's interesting that we're bringing these two pieces together today.
Right.
So, B, can you tell me, is there anything about her paintings that surprise you?
Okay, so when I read about like the inspiration behind like the tennis series, like I guess like going into it, I thought that they would have, I knew they were going to be like rebellious, right? Just because of the subject and like what she was reacting to. But I thought that they would have like more colorful celebratory color scheme similar to Self's work. And that it would be like these women who are like indulging in kind of vices or pleasurable things. And I thought that their facial expressions would have been, I don't know, indulgent or laughing or happy, which now that I'm saying it out loud, it's making me think about how women are constantly be told to like, oh, smile. Like, why aren't you laughing and smiling? But I guess I thought that going into it, it would be more something about their faces, like being so neutral, and they just, some of them look very unhappy. So I guess that surprised me.
Yeah, I like that you're pointing out the faces in particular, because I feel like, especially when we're thinking about portraiture, we connect with the faces a lot and they express so much about the story that's happening in every painting. So there's a lot to be said. There's very micro differences in expressions in a lot of the different paintings as I'm looking at them. And I think it's cool that you've pointed that out too, what we expect women's faces to be like when they're having a nice time. Like, what does your face actually look like versus what people expect your face to look like when you're by yourself having a good time.
So I really loved the writing and that article that you sent me describing this spring collection. I really felt like I was right there with this writer at Fashion Week during the show. It just was such lively writing. Do you have a favorite piece from the collection?
I had a couple that I really loved. We've got looks 15 and 17. So kind of in the middle-ish of this collection. All of the like gauzy organza dresses are to die for. I would love one myself, cannot afford. I especially liked them though in the powder blue because it made them look even more cloud-like. Less jellyfish, more cloud. And I really liked that. And then I also love the fringy collared shirts. I find myself wearing a lot of collared shirts, which comes from my tiny Christian school upbringing of always having to wear something with a collar. But
Yeah.
I'm reclaiming that for myself. And if I had one of those Prada shirts that are like fringy with a collar, they've got a lot of texture going on. And I like the way that they paired them with these sort of slightly translucent skirts where you can sort of see the, I guess, underwear underneath, everything that's underneath. Sort of that rebellion is happening there of like, I've got this nice collared shirt on, but I also have this translucent skirt on and a big jacket. And I think just all the genre blending, for lack of a better term, is super cool. Were there any looks that you liked in particular?
Well, there were so many that I really liked. Something I really appreciated about this whole collection was how much restraint there seemed to be from head to toe. And then there would usually be like that really colorful shoe. So it felt like a visual catharsis to look at some of these really tailored looks. Like one of it looked like a 1980s jumpsuit corporate bodysuit thing.
It's
Yes.
like look number 4, maybe,
Okay.
for those who would like to
Oh,
reference it, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah. So those like really, I don't know, restrictive tailored looks. So like scrolling through those and then getting to a look that would get to those shoes and it'd be that bright pop of color felt, I don't know, exciting.
There's like little moments of playfulness. It feels very tasteful a lot of the time. And like, I think that's because you're trying to work at the highest levels of fashion and be very intentional with the product that you're creating. But I feel like a lot too when I'm dressing myself, I like a little element of playfulness. And I don't care if it's as tasteful, but like I like that that was coming through in this collection too. So then we're talking a lot about this particular collection by Danielle Orchard, or thinking about all of her paintings having to do with, you know, being on the green, playing tennis. But I also was looking at, I think you maybe had an article in the Paris Review. There was an interview with Danielle Orchard talking about this like tights and no knickers painting, which was really interesting to me. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about that and we can chat a little bit more about it.
Yes. So it's a painting, a close-up shot of a woman in tights with no underwear. So I love the earthy, quiet color she uses in that work. This is just like my own personal response to the work. At first glance, the colors just like don't immediately draw me in, but I feel like her choice of color invites a more meditative, quiet, reflective engagement versus like, bright, fun colors sometimes can invite, for me, like a more celebratory engagement. Obviously, I think all art invites inquiry, reflection, engagement, but there's something more subdued about Orchard's work and also about this Prada collection. I just noticed restraint, things being buttoned up, not tons of moments of skin showing. If skin shows in the Prada collection, it's like the leg. Yeah, I really like the image that Orchard created there of just like a close up of that. Again, I feel like it goes back to her just very sensual work. Was there something that drew you to it or made you think was very interesting? Did you have a reaction to it?
I felt like it was definitely distinctly different from the collection or works that you were talking about a little bit more, where it's more like a portrait further away from the women, and this is like up close and personal. But there's also something like really engaging about being that close, and also because it related so directly of like thinking about the clothing that's happening in Danielle's paintings, and like literally us talking about a Prada collection here, clothing as well. There's no tights involved in this collection, but I guess there are like occasional moments of, with the skirts especially that we were talking about, there's moments of reveal versus hiding things. There's not as much restraint to the skirts in the collection
Mm-hmm.
as there is to, literally tights on a woman's body, but it's playing with similar ideas of the reveal versus hiding and constraint versus like freedom, I think. And that's why I was like, oh, this is something that we should really talk about here, is that both of those things are happening in both of these collections.
Yeah. There's also something like really rebellious and playful about the image too, of like a woman wearing tights with no underwear. And I don't know if like her like pubic hair is showing in it too. I can't remember it. I'm like looking on my bookshelf because I've got the issue. I think it's on the cover, but hold on, let me see.
I
You
believe
remember?
I was just looking at it. So yeah,
Uh,
she's bald.
okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, I have it.
Which is
Yep, she's
also,
bald. Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
she's bald. But yeah, there was something else that came to mind. I think it's also just the visceral feeling that I had looking at that of like, I hate the feeling of tights personally, and then thinking about wearing them that way, while someone might feel like rebellious, have a good time with that, I would feel really uncomfortable with the tight material being that close to my skin. So I think that's also why I had a personal response to it.
That's totally fair.
So in that interview, the interviewer asked why tights and no knickers. Orchard said, I thought it would make her appear even more uncomfortable. Nailed it. I was uncomfortable. It would heighten the sensuality, but also anyone who has ever worn tights would just be thinking about how gross that would feel. I was interested in those little gestures, nods in the direction of a woman's true experience, which are often lost on a male viewership. In my experience, male viewers tend to see the painting in sexualized terms,
Mhm.
while the humor is almost always picked up on by female viewers.
Yes. So true.
I was going to talk a little bit more too about any parallels that I saw between Orchard's work and the Prada collection, and you can add your thoughts too. But surprisingly for me, or maybe not surprisingly, I felt like the color schemes and the shapes and patterns seemed to connect the works together in ways that I wasn't expecting until I was like looking at them side by side. That's why I love juxtaposing.
No.
The bold blocks of colors in Orchard's work are also present in the Prada collection. Like, think a whole dress just in one block of color. And also, I felt like if I saw someone wearing the Prada ready to wear collection and they were standing in front of a painting by Orchard, I would like have this feeling of like, I want to take a picture. They seem like they belong in front of that painting.
Mhm.
So, how about you? How do you see the parallels between these two things?
A lot of Orchard's work incorporates ideas of clothing, so like uniforms and tennis and tights, and her work rebels against how clothing polices the female body. Obviously, there's sensuality is the central focus of her work as well. Something I really appreciated about the Prada collection was how androgynous it was, and it seemed like the collection was calling attention to the stiff corporate garb and the way it hides, restricts the body. So I felt like rebellion was something that was happening in both. There's parallels there.
I really like the point that you're bringing up about rebellion, and how there's also like a sort of like there's the two things of rebellion and restraint happening in both artworks. And I also was just thinking about the way that Danielle Orchard's work has sort of that cubist element and the like patchworkiness, for lack of a better term, but sort of like the patchworkiness of it definitely feels a lot like the Prada collection too, of bringing together swatches of clothing in different ways and patchworking it together, but it all like makes sense together. So I just started thinking about, in that rebellious spirit, there's this sort of like, let's bring together things that don't seem necessarily like they mesh entirely, or like let's leave lines between colors and do more like gestural type things to create this thing. And that's happening between both things. And that's really cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. The only other thought I had that I wanted to highlight about the rebellion in Prada spring collection was the female models wearing that power suit. And it's like power suit, and then it gets to the shorts, and there are these like little tiny cut off mini shorts. I just loved that. It was like, it felt like severing of old ideas. It's like, no, we're going to like dismantle the power suit and give you something else that is more free and the legs are exposed. And so I really felt drawn to that.
Yeah, totally. I'm looking at it now too. Even like the very first look has those teeny tiny shorts, and the sleeves are ultra long also. So there's like this magnification of like the arm length and the leg length, because you got short shorts and long sleeves.
Yes. I feel like with corporate America, like it's demanded on you to be like ultra productive. And yet there's like all these rules in how you like dress at work, especially those super Wall Street jobs where it's like you have to wear very corporate clothes that are so stiff, devoid of any personality. So I feel like with that highlighting of like the super long arms, it's like, dude, like how productive can you be when your hands I mean, like, you can't even
use my hands.
So I don't know. I just felt so drawn to those. It almost felt like commentary and a dismantling of that corporate uniform in a really fun way.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for listening to today's episode about the Spring-Summer Prada collection and Danielle Orchard's paintings. Please check out our website at the link in the description for more information from this episode. If you have feedback or pairing that you're just dying for us to talk about, please send us a message over on our website. You can also find us at Juxtapose Podcast on Instagram. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks with an episode about Search Party, the TV show, and Flo Milli, rapper extraordinaire. I'm really looking forward to it.
Bye.
Bye.